I didn't realize that my co-hostess here can pick politicians and leaders. Did you know you could do that?
Absolutely. No, not at all. I am not claiming that.
What gave you the clue?
That what? That I can't pick them?
What? No, Condoleezza Rice is now at the head of the list for VP.
Well, of course. Are you surprised? But here's the key, though. You know, she may be at the head of the list, but does she want to be at the head of the list? That's the question. I asked her that.
You asked her if she wanted to be president or vice president?
Of course I did.
And here she is saying that?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the interviews I've interviewed. I've interviewed her several different times, and the last time I interviewed her, I asked that very question. I said, would you ever run either for president or to be vice president? And her response was simply, no. Well,
we'll see. Okay,
yeah.
Well, she's according to Drudge and all these guys that write these blogs, she's a woman, she's black, she's got a foreign policy experience, and she interviewed with Christie, and she told her she knows how to cook.
And a lot of other things. Oh. But more important, that you left out one other adjective. She's brilliant. That woman is brilliant and so knowledgeable about so many different subjects. Okay. I think she'd be a phenomenal person in the vice president position. Beyond.
But you picked her in advance, I'm telling you. From humble beginnings. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, in the news, it's the Civil War you aren't hearing about, and the most brutal battle in the world right now. What is it? It's Muslim fighting Muslim. And as somebody said, when your enemies are fighting each other, don't get involved.
We're talking about the war between Muslims in Syria. Chris Mitchell has a story from Jerusalem.
Grainy cell phone video, brutal fighting, Islamic shouts, and failed negotiations marked a 17-month-long Syrian uprising.
Bashar Assad and his Alawite elite are fighting a war of self-preservation against what is essentially a Sunni revolt against them.
This revolt pits Sunni against Shiite.
The strategic fault line of conflict in the region between the Iran-led regional bloc on the one hand, and I would say the Sunni bloc, or the Sunni group of states, including Saudi Arabia, that fault line right now is running through Syria.
That fault line splits the Middle East into two large Islamic camps. The larger one includes the Sunni nations of Egypt, Turkey, the Gulf states, and the epicenter of Sunni Islam, Saudi Arabia. Iran leads the Shiite Islam group that includes its proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria. While President Assad and much of his regime technically belong to a sect called Alawite, they align themselves with Shiite Islam. So with both groups calling themselves Muslims, why do they fight each other? The answer goes back to the beginning of Islam.
The Shiites believe that Islam should have been led from the very beginning by a caliph who came from the family of the Prophet himself, in fact, from the family of the cousin of the Prophet called Ali. The Sunnis believe that the caliph, namely the leader of the Islamic community, the commander of the faithful, should be elected from the community.
This theological disagreement led to the Great Islamic Divide.
And there was tremendous enmity and tremendous hatred between the two parts.
That hatred is now being fought on Syrian soil.
It's a reflection of this main struggle in the Middle East today.
In this struggle, Iran funds and arms the Assad regime, while the Saudis and other Sunni powers back the opposition, which includes elements of the Muslim Brotherhood. The U.S. is lining up behind the opposition groups.
There's a growing evidence that on the ground and away from the public eye, there is American personnel who are helping to direct resources and weaponry to the rebels.
Spire says the U.S. and the West have in effect given the job of building up the Syrian opposition to the Saudis. Unfortunately, that opposition is becoming more radical and Islamist.
To put it simply, if you give the Saudis the job of creating an insurgency for you, well, don't be surprised if you get a Sunni Islamist insurgency.
The outcome of this struggle between these two Middle East titans will greatly determine the future and fate of the Middle East. It's a conflict that Israeli leaders are watching closely. If the Syrian opposition topples Assad, it's possible that Israel could have a second radical Islamic regime on its borders. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Now, you haven't heard that much before, ladies and gentlemen, but this is the conflict that's coming up. The followers of Ali, the Shias, versus the Sunnis. And they can get very bloody. It's like cousin against cousin, and they're going to be destroying one another. And as I say, when your enemies are killing themselves, stay out of the conflict. Let them just go ahead and do it. But we shouldn't be on the side of either one. I've been very cautious about saying we ought to help the Syrian opposition. I don't like what Assad is doing, but his daddy did worse. In the city of Hama, he butchered 20 to 30,000 members of the Brotherhood who were rising against him during his regime, and he didn't stand for it. So his son says, I'm going to do like my daddy, and I'm going to make sure that these people don't take me from power. Isn't that interesting, though? The Alawites, the Shias, and the Sunnis. You'll hear more about it, but you heard it here maybe first. Well, Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Lee?
Pat, the Obama campaign is making a big issue of Mitt Romney's wealth, and the president continually says the rich need to start paying their fair share in taxes. But a new survey finds that most Americans still respect the wealthy. A market research firm called Globespan conducted the poll. It found that 58% agree with the statement that most rich people in my country deserve their wealth. Other surveys have shown similar findings, Pat.
Well, the president studied at the school of Saul Alinsky, and Saul Alinsky was for class warfare. And so what Obama wants to do is to create class envy and class warfare. But the American people think that the lowest among us can aspire to be the highest among us. And actually, Obama shows that himself. He's a mixed race. Father was Kenyan, his mother was American, and he comes out of essentially nothing to become president. So we all hope to aspire that we can have a better life for our children and that we can achieve some level of wealth. And people who preach class warfare don't win. George McGovern tried it and he lost, and Obama's going to lose if he continues. Lee.
Pat, Penn State's Board of Trustees says it takes full responsibility for the failures that led to the Jerry Sandusky child abuse scandal. The board made its statement after an investigation by former FBI Director Louis Freeh. That report says university officials, including legendary football coach Joe Paterno, looked the other way and seemed more concerned about the school's reputation and Coach Sandusky than his victims. Mark Martin has the story.
Former FBI director and lead investigator into the scandal, Louis Freeh, described the actions of Penn State's top officials as callous and shocking.
The most powerful men at Penn State failed to take any steps for 14 years to protect the children who Sandusky victimized.
Freeh accuses them of covering up the Jerry Sandusky child sex abuse scandal to avoid bad publicity.
Although concern to treat the child abuser humanely was expressly stated, no such sentiments were ever expressed by them to Sandusky's victims.
Last month, a jury found Sandusky guilty of 45 counts of abusing children. In Freeh's 267-page report, he also blames late Penn State head football coach Joe Paterno, former President Graham Spanier, Vice President Gary Schultz, and athletic director Tim Curley. According to the report, Paterno admitted to learning about an incident in 2001 involving Sandusky and a boy in a shower. He told Curley instead of calling police, but no one contacted the authorities.
There's really no new facts involved in this, just some new interpretations that really won't take away from anything that he's done.
The attorney for one of Sandusky's victims at his criminal trial also now plans to sue Penn State.
This was a systemic failure from the bottom to the top.
Penn State is pledging reform.
An event like this can never happen again in the Penn State University community. Judge Freeh's report is both sad and sobering.
Mark Martin, CBN News.
Yeah, and investigators also found that Penn State's Board of Trustees is partially to blame for not holding those top leaders accountable. And the report gives lawyers more information for major civil lawsuits that are sure to follow against Penn State University. The school year has ended for millions of children across the country, but the workload for school officials continues. And as John Jessup reports, those seeking wisdom from a higher authority are getting encouragement from, of all places, Washington.
50 years after the Supreme Court handed down its ruling on school prayer, The subject still stirs strong emotions on both sides. But the ban on school-sponsored prayer fits into a larger debate about prayer in the public square.
We are not asking that it be forced on anyone.
Two-term Michigan Congressman Tim Walberg believes prayer is a part of America's DNA. He points to the founding fathers who sought divine guidance when drafting the Constitution.
It was like second nature that all of a sudden it was stopped and said, let's go to prayer.
As a former pastor and now in public office, prayer plays a major role in Walberg's life. He's part of a network of legislators advancing laws that protect America's religious liberties. One way he's trying to do that is with a House resolution supporting school boards that start their meetings with prayer, something over which some school boards and other local bodies have faced lawsuits in recent years.
If you want to pray at a town hall meeting or at a school board meeting or in the halls of Congress, that ought to be acceptable in the United States.
Walberg bases his resolution on the fact that school boards are deliberative bodies and argues that it's constitutional based on a 1983 Supreme Court case that acknowledged prayer is so deeply embedded in America's history and tradition that a public body making laws and invoking divine guidance is not in violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. Court rulings appear to be trending toward the other side of the argument. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal from a Delaware school district where school board meetings started in prayer. Opponents say the effort to promote Judeo-Christian values supports one religion over another.
It creates a precedent, or at least the appearance, that that particular religious perspective has some type of special relationship with the government. And the government really shouldn't be taking a stand like that.
As for Walberg, he says his resolution doesn't aim to infringe on anyone's freedom, rather to acknowledge the role and the power of prayer.
We're not pushing on other people and saying you have to do this. It's promoted freedom in this country and in the world, and we want to continue it.
John Jessup, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
And we will keep you posted on that story. Well, some simple weight loss techniques are proving effective. A new study published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommends 3 simple ways to lose weight, and accountability is the key. The study showed that women who didn't skip meals lost 8 pounds more than those who did. Women who completed food journals lost about 6 pounds more, and those who ate lunch out at least once a week lost 5 fewer pounds than those who ate out less. Pat, self-control, the key.
I really think that's what it amounts to. But you can, you know, if you eat certain foods that they make you hungry, you eat more high glycemic carbs, they create a craving. If you eat sugar, you want more sugar. You eat sweets, you want more sweets. It's just something about it. Whereas if we eat fresh vegetables and protein, and we get plenty of sleep, we don't eat as much.
Yeah, but you know what? The journal factor really is important, because think about it. How many times are we in the kitchen and we kind of nibble? We see a cookie, we eat it while we're cooking, or we have a handful of potato chips while we're doing this. And so next thing you know, we're eating all these empty calories, but we don't even know we're doing it. You start to journal what you eat, and all of a sudden you look at it like, oh, good googly goo, I've been eating that much?
I haven't got time for some stupid food journal, but I'm sure it'll work.
Massachusetts officials have reversed one town's ban on American flags. The housing authority in the town of Wrentham had banned American flags after a tenant made repeated complaints over the 4th of July holiday. They notified residents on Wednesday this week that their flags would have to go. One housing complex in Wrentham even started taking down flags from residents' homes. The Massachusetts Department of Housing, though, issued a statement saying the town's policy was a mistake that is being corrected immediately. Operation Blessing is partnering with Glenn Beck and his organization Mercury One to support a nationwide food drive. It's part of Mercury One's Restoring Love Through Service campaign. The goal is to feed hungry Americans and mobilize volunteers from coast to coast. Operation Blessing will provide 11 tractor-trailer trucks to deliver more than 300,000 pounds of donated food to targeted cities across the nation. The actual Restoring Love event will be held in Dallas, July 26th through the 28th. And you can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to its website at ob.org.